1st of February 2022.
Russia could launch an attack.
A possible Russian invasion.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades.
From news.com.au.
I'm Andrew Bucklow, and I've got news for you. Well, from the looks of it, Russia and Ukraine are on the brink of war. Vladimir Putin has sent 100,000 of his troops, plus tanks, fighter jets and helicopters, to line the border of Ukraine, and many are convinced that he'll soon order his forces to invade. Now, in response, the US has put troops on high alert and has told them to get ready to deploy to Eastern Europe, setting the stage for an ugly armed conflict. Today, we'll find out why the Russian president wants to invade the neighbouring country, and we'll also chat to an Aussie in Ukraine who'll reveal what it's like living under the threat of war and whether people are planning their escape.
People are starting to ask the question, like, what the hell do I do? What am I going to do about that? And so really, it's a bit of a juggling act to keep cool, but also start making a plan.
Joining me now to break down this conflict between Ukraine and Russia is news.com.au senior reporter Sam Clench. All right, Clenchy, to understand what's happening now, we really need to go back to 2014, don't we?
Yeah, we certainly do. So back in early 2014, the pro-Russian president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, was driven out of power by months of mass protests, essentially a revolution, right? A caretaker government was put in place until new elections could be held. That caretaker government was recognized by the global community, but not by Russia, which said it was illegitimate. Within days of that happening, within days of Yanukovych being ousted, Russian forces poured into Crimea, which is a peninsula in southern Ukraine. And those forces seized government buildings, essentially taking control of the region and deposing its existing government. An invasion, essentially. Crimea subsequently held a referendum, with the question being whether it should secede from Ukraine and join Russia. The result came back as yes, and so Russia formally annexed Crimea. Now, we should stress that that referendum was considered illegal by the international community, and naturally there were doubts raised about the validity of its results. But the upshot is that Crimea remains under Russian control to this day. Now, that wasn't the end of the conflict either, far from it. Pro-Russian separatists in parts of eastern Ukraine declared their independence from the Ukrainian government, and that sparked heavy fighting which killed thousands of people. The West accused Russia of sending troops, weapons, and other resources to help the rebels. Russia rather brazenly denied doing so. Eventually, a pretty complicated peace agreement of sorts was signed, but that didn't stop all the violence, and the situation in eastern Ukraine has remained pretty fraught ever since. As things stand, the separatists are still in control of a significant amount of eastern Ukraine near the Russian border. So that's what the situation looked like before the current uptick in tensions. Russia in control of Crimea and Russian-backed rebels fighting in eastern Ukraine.
Well, let's talk about these uptick in tensions. When did it really flare up over there?
Yeah, in recent months, there's been a pretty massive buildup of Russian forces along the border with Ukraine. So reportedly about 100,000 troops, nothing to sniff at. And that is really the source of the current tensions. Ukraine, the United States, and NATO are worried that the troop buildup is preparation for an invasion. For what it's worth, Russia denies that's its intention.
Okay, but a lot of people in the West do believe that Vladimir Putin is going to order his troops to invade Ukraine, and not only likely, but that it's going to happen imminently. Is that correct? Yeah, well, the US at least certainly seems to think so. In December, its intelligence agencies warned an invasion could happen as soon as early 2022, which is, now-ish. President Biden actually held a phone call with the Ukrainian leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, last week to discuss the situation, and the two men reportedly had something of a disagreement over the likelihood of an invasion. Zelensky, more of an optimist, he was of the opinion that Russia's intentions remain ambiguous. Biden is reported to have told him an invasion was all but certain once the ground freezes, which would mean, late February, within weeks from this moment now. I should note the White House disputes that account of the conversation. In its telling, Biden was a little more circumspect and said an invasion was merely a distinct possibility rather than a certainty. But it's clear that the US is very, very worried. And we've heard similar warnings from other Western powers as well. Britain, for example, has said its intelligence indicates Russia is planning some sort of swift strike on the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. And in a pretty telling move, both the US and UK recently instructed the personnel at their embassies in Ukraine to leave the country, because their safety could not be guaranteed. Well, Clenchy, what's been the response from other countries in regards to this threatening behaviour from Russia?
Well, look, it's a real dilemma for the rest of the world. Russia is a nuclear power. The idea of intervening militarily and getting mired in a full-scale war with Russia, that just isn't palatable or particularly feasible for the West. So the likely response to an invasion would be to impose economic sanctions on Russia and on specific Russians, and to make those sanctions as crippling as possible. That could involve, for example, disconnecting Russia's banks from the SWIFT payment system, which is used around the world. It could mean imposing financial pain on Vladimir Putin himself or his top lieutenants. Whatever sort of suite of sanctions they end up going with, the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, has warned previously, back in December, that Russia would pay a very high price for any aggression. And Biden has promised a swift and severe response. We'd probably also expect the West to help Ukraine resist a Russian occupation by providing more weapons and other resources, like it's been doing for years now. But again, we're talking about support for Ukraine and sanctions on Russia, not any kind of direct military intervention.
Last week, the Australian government told the 1,400 Aussies living in Ukraine to leave for their own safety, but some, such as Richardenza, have decided to stay. Richardenza is an Australian journalist living in Kiev, which is the capital city of Ukraine. He joins me on the line now. Richard, how long have you been living over there?
I've been in the region for just under a year now. I moved, not expecting any of this, and you pull up, sort yourself out, and then you start reading the news and you realise you might have signed up for something that, you really didn't understand.
What's the vibe like over there at the moment? Is there a lot of tension in the air?
Yeah, to put it mildly, there's a bit of tension. But, Ukrainians, they've been at war for a very long time. In the east of the country, the Russians have been there since 2014. And, there's been all the time rumbling along, rumours of an invasion, rumours that Vladimir Putin is going to come in and do this or that. And sometimes it's all talk and it amounts to nothing. So people in Ukraine are pretty cynical and skeptical, and sometimes they think that the rumours are the weapon and it's all a psychological battle to make them lose their cool. And to win that battle, they need to keep calm, ignore everything, go into work every day, keep living the life and enjoying the freedoms that they've been fighting for so many years.
And so that's what they're doing over there. They're not taking much notice of all these troops on the border?
Yeah, and so it's a gamble in a way, right? Because you don't give an inch in the psychological ground before a potential invasion, but once it comes in, who knows what's going to happen. So it's a bit of a trick, right? Because on the one hand, if there's troops at your door, you still have to provide for your family. You still have to, you don't lose your obligations. But on the other hand, people are starting to make plans here and there. People are starting to pack an emergency bag that they can take and run. If someone has like a grandmother living right on the border with Russia, people are starting to ask the question, like, what the hell do I do? What am I going to do about that? And so really, it's a bit of a juggling act to keep cool, but also start making a plan.
Well, the Australian government has advised Aussies to leave Ukraine. How come you decided to stay?
Well, if I was just a bloke here and enjoying the museums and enjoying the bars and restaurants, then I might be on the plane with him. But I'm a journalist, and this is probably not the smartest career choice. But sometimes you have to stay a bit longer than everyone else.
So if war does break out, if Russian troops invade, what's the plan then? Are you going to stick around?
Yeah, so, I've got a lot of mates who are sort of already packing their bags. It depends, really. For me personally, I think, I think it's important to try and keep going, and it's obviously a really big thing to be on the front lines for, or, to if you have a good seat for something in history as a journalist, you want to keep trying to do that. But I've got an HR department and they don't want any bombs to fall on my head either. So, I might get kicked out. I'll see what they say.
What about your friends and family back here in Australia? Are they a bit worried about you?
Yeah, that it's not every day that you pick up the appetizer in Adelaide and you read the word Ukraine. So when you do, it's usually not good news. So yeah, I'm definitely getting a lot of messages from my parents and from old mates that haven't been in touch for a little while, and they're saying, "What's this all about?" Good luck with everything, and so on. So it's a totally crazy situation, and you start to realize that in Australia, you were pretty safe and sound before you got this stupid idea to start traveling the world.
This is probably a hard question to answer, but what's your gut telling you? Do you think Russia will invade?
Yeah, I mean, it's really not looking good. You look at America's opinion about some of these things. They reckon it's just a couple of weeks away. They reckon that it's not just going to be like a regional war. They think that Vladimir Putin's going to be pretty ambitious, and that the capital could be a place that goes from being a really great place to live to a place that you just you have to get out of there because it's going to get ugly. So yeah, you read that and you really think that this could be something big, and it could be something extremely bad.
John Story is a lawyer and a military historian. He has a new book out called Big Wars, Why Do They Happen and When Will the Next One Be? John, thanks for coming on I've Got News for You.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Great to be here.
Well, I may as well ask you the big question straight up. What are the most likely places that a big war could break out next?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting that the media and the world are focused on the Ukraine at the moment. There's an old saying that lightning doesn't strike the same place twice, but in reality, we all know that's actually not true. If lightning hits a mountain peak or a building or a tree, next time there's an electrical storm, you're best to avoid those areas. Lightning definitely does strike the same place twice. And the same in the case of wars and other human-made disasters. They're not evenly distributed across the planet. They tend to recur in the same places. And in the last 100 years, we're probably the worst place to live as far as wars, genocides and man-made famines would be the Ukraine. Oh. It's been the epicenter of the fighting in 2 world wars, the largest civil war in the last 100 years. And it's also been the victim of genocides from 2 of the 3 great dictators of the 20th century. So, look, if you're a betting person and if you believe these things happen for a reason, World War III starting in the Ukraine would have to be up on the list.
Oh, God. Are there any other potentials apart from the Ukraine?
Well, the other obvious focus at the moment is Taiwan. And that there's an area where, obviously there's a lot of international focus. China has declared that, it will resolve this issue once and for all, whatever that means. And I think many people expect at some time, different pundits have set different dates, that there may very well be a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. It's the trickle-on effects of these events that could lead to a broader conflict, something like the world wars of the 20th century.
Well, if either of those ones break out, what's the likelihood of Australia getting involved in these conflicts?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a possibility, particularly in the case of Taiwan, where we have an alliance with the United States and we've entered into various military alignments with China as the focus. So if there is a war breaks out there, it's highly likely Australia will become involved. Having said that, we will follow the United States. We won't be leading it. It's really if a war breaks out between China and the United States in respect to Taiwan or anything else, that Australia is highly likely to line up with the United States. And then we'll be in on it. If you look at the history of not just the world wars that we call world wars, World War I and World War II, but the history of large conflicts which occur roughly every 50 years for the last 400 or 500 years, what they tend to be is wars of alliances. So there are various alliances that are formed, and then a war breaks out somehow, someone's assassinated or there's an invasion of one country or something like that, then all the other alliances members kick into gear and we get these huge conflagrations, which in the case of World War II rippled all the way around the world. And that's how it sort of happens. You end up getting dragged in one way or another, sometimes whether you want to or not, because if you're not on someone's side, you're an easy picking for someone else. And that's the real danger. If we're returning to a world of alliances and balance of power politics, which we certainly seem to be, then it's pretty hard to stay neutral in some of those situations, and Australia will probably take a side.
John, I wanted to ask you about nuclear weapons. Now, they've only been used twice in warfare, both times by the US during World War II. If World War III does break out at some stage, what's the likelihood of nukes being used, do you think?
Yeah, it's a really great question and something I talk a lot about in my book. I think the first thing to acknowledge when receiving a question like that is that anyone who is asked about, what World War III might look like, the only true answer is we have no idea. That's why it's so dangerous. We have no idea. It's been a very long time since we've had a major international war on any large scale. We simply don't know what it'll be like. Now, personally, I kind of feel that nuclear weapons, as time goes by, the risk of using them increases for a couple of reasons. The first one is that the deterrent effect of nuclear weapons was sort of seeing the horrible visions of entire city burnt. I've actually been to Hiroshima and the Peace Memorial Museum, and it really is moving to see the effects of them. But the more that time goes by, the more it's sort of grainy black and white photos and all the victims are long passed away and it disappears from memory. The more that we may forget how horrible they actually are. Another sort of opposite answer to that is that nuclear weapons have been built up as such a unusable instrument that there may very well come a time when someone thinks, you know what, I know the other side aren't going to attack us with nuclear weapons because they're too scared, we'll retaliate. Maybe we can get away with using them in this limited situation. If China's getting their butt kicked in Taiwan, they might think, you know what, we could probably solve this with nuclear weapons and there's no way America are going to attack us because they know that we'll launch them back. So I just feel that the further removed we are from the events of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the more memory fades and the more that someone might think that nuclear weapons are a solution to their military problem.
We'll keep you up to date on all the developments between Russia and Ukraine on news.com.au. In the meantime, thanks for listening to I've Got News for You. I'll chat to you again tomorrow.